In a world that often defines worthiness by superficial standards, limited women, whether by circumstance, physical ability, societal expectations, or emotional trauma, are frequently told, both directly and indirectly, that love is a luxury they might never earn. They are rarely shown in love stories, seldom written into fairy tales, and often erased from the narrative of romantic fulfillment. Yet the reality is far richer, far deeper, and far more powerful than the stories we've been told. Love does not conform to the parameters of perfection. Love is not reserved for the idealized few. Love, in its most authentic form, is expansive, inclusive, and resilient. It finds its way into the lives of those who have been told they are too broken, too different, or too damaged. It defies limitation. And consider the woman who has lived most of her life in silence due to a hearing impairment. In a society that places immense value on verbal communication, she has spent years navigating relationships in silence, being misunderstood or overlooked. But then she meets someone who chooses to learn her language, sign language, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to connect. This is not just love expressed through words. This is love communicated through patience, presence, and effort. It is a love that emerged not despite the limitation, but through it, a testament to how human connection adapts when it is rooted in authenticity. And there are women whose physical disabilities have confined them to wheelchairs, who often face the harsh assumption that their lives are defined only by their limitations. Many have been conditioned to believe that they are invisible when it comes to romantic relationships. But love is not so easily deterred. In truth, there are countless stories of partners who are not only unbothered by the presence of a wheelchair, but are drawn to the strength, humor, creativity, and depth of character that often comes from living life with a different set of challenges. In these cases, love does not ignore the disability. It includes it, accommodates it, and embraces it. It grows within the real terrain of life, not in the fantasy of flawlessness. And there are women who have endured past trauma, emotional abuse, abandonment, violence. These experiences leave scars that aren't always visible, but they shape how a woman sees herself and how she believes she can be loved. Many are told or come to believe that they are too much or too damaged for love. But healing often begins not only through therapy or self-help, but also through the presence of someone who stays. Someone who doesn't run when her walls go up, who doesn't flinch at her moments of fear or her days of withdrawal. Love, in these instances, doesn't try to fix her. It stands with her. And in doing so, it becomes a kind of quiet, steady revolution, a refusal to let past pain dictate future joy. And economic limitation is another reality that too many women face, especially in cultures where financial independence is equated with personal value. A woman working multiple jobs to care for her children might not see herself as someone who has the time or space to be loved. But love is not limited by calendars or bank balances. There are men and women who see strength in sacrifice, who are moved not by what someone has, but by who they are. Love, in this light, is not about being rescued, but about being recognized. It's about looking at someone in the midst of their storm and still seeing light. And then there are women limited by ageism, those in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, told that their window for love has closed. Yet time and again, love arrives in the second act, often richer, deeper, and more honest than anything experienced in youth. These are relationships not built on infatuation, but on understanding, shared values, and mature connection. These women are not settling down as much as they are awakening to the possibility, strength they carry quietly, sometimes painfully, through the day-to-day challenges of simply existing in a world that doesn't always make room for their truth. For these women, vulnerability becomes a kind of power, one that allows love to not only enter their lives, but to thrive in ways that are deeply transformative. And it is in the cracks, not the polished surfaces, that connection truly happens. A woman who shows up as she is, imperfect, uncertain, still healing, is often far more powerful than one who wears a mask of perfection. That rawness, that openness, becomes the bridge between isolation and intimacy. Vulnerability allows another person to say, I see you, and more importantly, I still choose you. And that kind of love, the kind that sees all of someone and chooses them anyway, is the only kind that can last. And many women are taught from a young age to hide their emotions, to toughen up, to perform strength through silence. In some cultures, vulnerability is treated as a flaw in femininity. In others, it's dismissed as emotional indulgence. But for limited women, women living with visible or invisible constraints, vulnerability is not an option they can turn off. Their reality often forces them to live close to pain, close to truth, close to the things that others spend a lifetime trying to hide. And because of this, their capacity to love and to be loved is not shallow, it is profound. And think of the woman battling mental illness, navigating anxiety, depression, or PTSD. She knows what it means to feel out of control, to fear her own mind, to question her worth on a daily basis. Yet in her willingness to be honest about her experience, she creates room for a kind of love that doesn't rely on constant strength. Her vulnerability allows her partner to be present in her healing, not as a savior, but as a witness. And when that partner meets her with compass, ion instead of judgment, when they say, you don't have to pretend to be okay, that is when love deepens beyond surface romance into something real, something grounding. Or take the woman who carries the wounds of childhood trauma, abandonment, neglect, emotional starvation. She might grow up believing that her worth is tied to her usefulness, to her silence, to her ability to endure. Yet somewhere along the way, she gathers the courage to show someone her inner world. She lets herself be known, not the curated version, but the real one, full of fear and hope and longing. That moment of exposure is terrifying, because rejection is always a possibility. But the act of revealing herself is an act of bravery. And when she is met with tenderness, when someone says, "Thank you for trusting me," it rewrites the old script that said she was too much to love. And vulnerability also appears in quieter, everyday ways. In the woman who's been through a bitter divorce and still opens herself to new love. In the single mother who, after years of putting her children first, allows someone into her life, not just as a co-parent, but as a companion. In the woman aging in a society obsessed with youth, who removes her makeup and lets herself be seen without pretense. These moments, small as they seem, require immense courage. They are declarations. I believe I am worthy of love just as I am. And it is this belief, not perfection, not beauty, not status, that draws in authentic connection. And strength in vulnerability means allowing love to enter even when there's a risk it might not stay. It means understanding that love is not guaranteed, but still choosing to offer your truth. It is a radical act, especially for women who have been repeatedly told that their truth is inconvenient, messy, or too difficult to handle. To say, "Here is who I am, take it or leave it," is a defiant kin, of strength. And when someone chooses to stay, to embrace her in all her wholeness, it affirms that vulnerability was not a mistake, but a pathway. And too often we celebrate the women strength they carry quietly, sometimes painfully, through the day-to-day challenges of simply existing in a world that doesn't always make room for their truth. For these women, vulnerability becomes a kind of power, one that allows love to not only enter their lives, but to thrive in ways that are deeply transformative. And it is in the cracks, not the polished surfaces, that connection truly happens. A woman who shows up as she is, imperfect, uncertain, still healing, is often far more powerful than one who wears a mask of perfection. That rawness, that openness, becomes the bridge between isolation and intimacy. Vulnerability allows another person to say, "I see you," and more importantly, "I still choose you." And that kind of love, the kind that sees all of someone and chooses them anyway, is the only kind that can last. And many women are taught from a young age to hide their emotions, to toughen up, to perform strength through silence. In some cultures, vulnerability is treated as a flaw in femininity. In others, it's dismissed as emotional indulgence. But for limited women, women living with visible or invisible constraints, vulnerability is not an option they can turn off. Their reality often forces them to live close to pain, close to truth, close to the things that others spend a lifetime trying to hide. And because of this, their capacity to love and to be loved is not shallow, it is profound. And think of the woman battling mental illness, navigating anxiety, depression, or PTSD. She knows what it means to feel out of control, to fear her own mind, to question her worth on a daily basis. Yet in her willingness to be honest about her experience, she creates room for a kind of love that doesn't rely on constant strength. Her vulnerability allows her partner to be present in her healing, not as a savior, but as a witness. And when that partner meets her with compass, ion instead of judgment, when they say, you don't have to pretend to be okay, that is when love deepens beyond surface romance into something real, something grounding. Or take the woman who carries the wounds of childhood trauma, abandonment, neglect, emotional starvation. She might grow up believing that her worth is tied to her usefulness, to her silence, to her ability to endure. Yet somewhere along the way, she gathers the courage to show someone her inner world. She lets herself be known, not the curated version, but the real one, full of fear and hope and longing. That moment of exposure is terrifying, because rejection is always a possibility. But the act of revealing herself is an act of bravery. And when she is met with tenderness, when someone says, thank you for trusting me, it rewrites the old script that said she was too much to love. And vulnerability also appears in quieter, everyday ways. In the woman who's been through a bitter divorce and still opens herself to new love. In the single mother who, after years of putting her children first, allows someone into her life, not just as a co-parent, but as a companion. In the woman aging in a society obsessed with youth, who removes her makeup and lets herself be seen without pretense. These moments, small as they seem, require immense courage. They are declarations. I believe I am worthy of love just as I am. And it is this belief, not perfection, not beauty, not status, that draws in authentic connection. And strength in vulnerability means allowing love to enter even when there's a risk it might not stay. It means understanding that love is not guaranteed, but still choosing to offer your truth. It is a radical act, especially for women who have been repeatedly told that their truth is inconvenient, messy, or too difficult to handle. To say, here is who I am, take it or leave it, is a defiant kin, D of strength. And when someone chooses to stay, to embrace her in all her wholeness, it affirms that vulnerability was not a mistake, but a pathway. And too often we celebrate the women who seem unshakable, the ones who never cry, never ask for help, never admit fear. But the women who allow themselves to feel deeply, to be moved, to open their arms even after loss. These are the ones who teach us what love really is. Love that is earned through performance is fragile. But love that grows through shared vulnerability is unbreakable. And even in romantic partnerships, the strongest relationships are not built on constant confidence or smooth compatibility, but on emotional honesty. The woman who says, I don't know how to do this, but I'm willing to try, invites her partner into a shared process. She is not promising perfection, she is offering presence. That is what most people crave at their core. Not someone who always has the answers, but someone who is willing to face the questions with them. And there's also a powerful shift that happens when a limited woman is no longer ashamed of her limitations. Instead of hiding her struggle with illness, with grief, with financial hardship, with body image, she acknowledges it as part of her story. And in doing so, she opens the door to deeper intimacy. The partner who hears her story and says, I still choose you, gives her something extraordinary. Love that sees the whole picture. And this kind of vulnerability strengthens love because it removes the pressure to perform. Both people in the relationship can show up as they are. They can talk about the hard things. They can disagree. They can hold each other through loss. And in each of those moments, the relationship becomes more solid. Not because there is no struggle, but because there is mutual openness and respect. And there's also something quietly revolutionary about the way vulnerability allows women to ask for what they need. Instead of pretending to be low maintenance or emotionally self-sufficient, a vulnerable woman says, I need reassurance. I need consistency. I need kindness. She doesn't demand perfection from her partner, but she names her needs with clarity. And when a partner steps up, not out of obligation, but out of love, the relationship becomes one of mutual nourishment rather than silent suffering. And it is important to recognize that vulnerability is not always about pain. It is also about joy, about the woman who laughs loudly, even when she's been told to be quiet, about the woman who dances without worrying about how she looks, about the woman who says, I love you first, even if she's not sure what the answer will be. Vulnerability is about living fully, not just surviving, and that fullness, that aliveness, is what makes love feel real. And strength in vulnerability means showing up anyway. It means trying again after heartbreak. It means believing that someone, somewhere, will not only accept your truth, but will love you more because of it. It means trusting that your softness is not a liability, but a gift. That being emotionally open doesn't make you less strong. It makes you unshakably human. And for limited women whose lives are often shaped by conditions out of their control, vulnerability becomes a form of agency. It allows them to speak, to feel, to connect. It is not about being dependent or exposed, but about being courageous enough to invite someone into your world. And when love arrives, not as a rescue mission, but as a respectful presence, that vulnerability becomes the foundation for something unbreakable. And love cannot grow where walls are built too high. It cannot breathe in the presence of constant emotional armor. But where there is openness, even imperfect and hesitant, love takes root. And it blooms not in spite of vulnerability, but because of it. And all throughout history, women have been measured by impossible standards, from the shape of their bodies to the softness of their voices, from their ability to nurture others to their willingness to remain small. The criteria by which they are judged has always been narrow, biased, and brutal. The term limited women doesn't speak to the truth of who they are. It speaks to the constraints placed upon them by systems, structures, and outdated stories. And yet, over and over again, these women continue to rise, not only to live, but to love, to be loved, and most importantly, to redefine what it means to be worthy of love in a world that often insists they are not. And stereotypes are powerful not because they are true, but because they are repeated. The idea that only certain kinds of women, young, thin, able-bodied, emotionally unscarred, financially stable, deserve romantic love is one of the most toxic and persistent myths in modern culture. This myth suggests that unless a woman fits within a narrow mold of desirability, she is inherently less lovable. But real life, unlike advertisements and movies, tells a very different story. Love shows up in unexpected places. It takes root in the hearts of women who don't fit the mold. And in doing so, it shatters the illusion that worth is based on appearance, ability, or social status. And consider the woman whose body does not conform to traditional beauty standards. She may live in a world that constantly reminds her of her flaws, but when she finds someone who looks at her with genuine admiration, not in spite of her body, but because they see her as whole, a powerful transformation occurs. Her very existence in a loving relationship challenges the idea that beauty is a requirement for love. It reveals that connection is not about symmetry or size, but about presence, kindness, depth, and joy. And then there's the woman who has never followed conventional paths. Perhaps she chose not to marry, or perhaps marriage was never offered to her. Perhaps she prioritized her career or her creative passions or her personal healing. Society might label her as too independent, too intense, or too late for love. But when she finds someone who respects her autonomy, who meets her as an equal rather than trying to diminish her strength, she does not compromise who she is to be loved. She expands, she grows in her own way, on her own timeline. And in doing so, she teaches others that love is not a reward for conformity. It is a celebration of authenticity. And there are women with visible disabilities who have spent their lives being stared at, pitied, or ignored. For them, being seen as a romantic or sexual being is often completely erased from public discourse. But these women fall in love. They are desired, admired, and pursued, not as a favor, not as charity, but because they are brilliant, beautiful, and deeply human. Every time a woman in a wheelchair is kissed in public, every time a woman with chronic illness is held close without shame, a stereotype is broken. Love becomes an act of rebellion, a quiet but radical refusal to let the world define who deserves affection. And emotional trauma is another limitation often used to disqualify women from love. The woman who carries the scars of abuse or abandonment is frequently labeled as damaged goods or too complicated. But those labels say more about the ignorance of society than about her actual worth. When someone chooses to love her with patience, to respect her boundaries, to honor her healing process, they are not only loving her, they are honoring the strength it took for her to survive. They are redefining intimacy, not as the absence of pain, but as the presence of trust, care, and resilience. And one of the most deeply ingrained stereotypes is the belief that a woman must be low maintenance to be lovable, that she must be agreeable, undemanding, emotionally neutral. But the reality is women who express needs, women who ask for clarity, women who refuse to shrink for the sake of someone else's comfort are often the strongest and most emotionally intelligent people in the room. When a woman refuses to play small and is still loved, fully, fiercely, without apology, she redefines what it means to be enough. And there are also the cultural and religious expectations that attempt to define what a good woman is. She must be modest but attractive, ambitious but not too ambitious, soft but not weak, strong but not intimidating. These double standards have caused countless women to question their value. Yet the most powerful relationships often occur when both people reject those cultural scripts. When a woman is free to be fully herself in love, whether that means loud, quiet, fierce, sensitive, or something in between, she proves that love does not ask for performance. It asks for truth. And ageism is another insidious stereotype, especially for women. After a certain point, many women are made to feel invisible, as if their capacity for romantic love has passed its expiration date. But love doesn't operate on a deadline. A woman in her 50s or 60s or beyond who falls in love is not indulging in fantasy. She is reminding the world that connection, desire, and emotional growth are lifelong experiences. Her love is often wiser, more intentional, more grounded. And in living it openly, she challenges the narrative that youth is a prerequisite for passion. And for women of color, the weight of stereotype is doubled. They are often exoticized, fetishized, or rendered invisible. Their worth is distorted by media narratives that reduce them to caricatures. But real love doesn't see skin tone as a checkbox or a curiosity. It sees culture, history, and identity as part of the richness of a person. When a woman of color is loved deeply, when her language, traditions, and struggles are respected, not appropriated or dismissed, she reclaims her narrative. She is not an accessory to someone else's story. She is the story. And another stereotype worth breaking is the one that says women must be healed or whole before they can be loved. This notion suggests that only those who have completed their journey of self-discovery are worthy of companionship. But healing is not linear. It is ongoing, complex, and deeply personal. And love does not need a polished version of someone. It needs a present one. When a woman is loved in the midst of her healing, when she is not rushed or fixed but held and respected, that love becomes part of her transformation. It reminds her that she doesn't have to earn affection through perfection. And society has also told women that they must be in a certain economic class to be relationship material. A woman who is struggling financially is often made to feel like a burden rather than a partner. But love is not limited to bank balances or career titles. A relationship built on mutual respect, shared vision, and emotional compatibility will always outlast one based on surface metrics. When a woman who is rebuilding her life, who may not have material stability yet, is still chosen with intentionality and devotion, she breaks the narrative that says love is a privilege of the wealthy. And every time a woman finds love while living outside of society's expectations, she sends a message that love is not a prize for perfection. It is not something handed out to those who meet a checklist. It is something co-created between two people who are willing to see each other as they are, not as they are told to be. And redefining worth means no longer tying a woman's value to her relationship status. It means celebrating her whether she is partnered or not, whether she is dating or single, whether she is loving someone else or loving herself. A woman who loves herself fully, who believes she is worthy even when no one is watching, is one of the most powerful forces on earth. And when she lets someone into that space, it is not because she needs validation, but because she wants connection. That difference matters. And these limited women who were told they were too different, too emotional, too plain, too complicated, are not just finding love. They are redefining what it looks like. They are proving that love is not about fitting in. It's about showing up. It's about standing in your truth and inviting someone to meet you there. And in doing so, they are not only reshaping their own lives, they are expanding the collective imagination of what love can look like for everyone. And love, when it is sincere and safe, does something extraordinary. It heals. It doesn't erase pain or rewrite the past, but it changes how that pain is carried. For women who have lived within limitations, whether emotional, societal, physical, or circumstantial, love often arrives not as a dramatic rescue, but as a steady hand, a gentle mirror, a quiet affirmation that says, "You're not alone anymore." Healing through connection is not about being saved, it's about being seen. It's about the profound and transformative experience of being accepted as you are by someone who chooses to stay. And some women grow up believing they are inherently unlovable. Maybe they were raised in homes where affection was conditional or not present at all. Maybe they internalized the message that love must be earned through obedience, sacrifice, or silence. As adults, these women often carry the residue of that early emotional starvation. They might flinch at kindness or question compliments. They might push people away to avoid the pain of being abandoned. And yet, when they meet someone who doesn't leave, who stays through their fear, through their quiet battles, through the long silences, something begins to shift inside them. That consistent presence is not just comforting, it's reparative. It becomes evidence that love can be safe. And healing through connection begins the moment someone feels safe enough to tell the truth. The truth about what hurt them. The truth about the nights they cried in secret. The truth about the masks they wore just to survive. When a woman speaks her truth and someone listens, not to judge, not to fix, but to understand, something sacred happens. The shame begins to loosen its grip. The burden of isolation becomes lighter. And in that space, healing quietly begins. And for the woman who carries invisible wounds, trauma, depression, anxiety, love often doesn't come in grand gestures, but in tiny, repeated acts of care. A partner who knows how to recognize the signs of a downward spiral. A friend who texts just to check in with no agenda. A hand held during a panic attack. A light left on during the night. These gestures may seem small, but for someone who has been drowning in silence, they are lifelines. They say, "You matter, I see you." And being seen is often the first step toward believing that healing is even possible. And women who have survived abuse, emotional, physical, or sexual, often struggle with trust. Their past experiences have taught them that closeness can be dangerous, that love can turn violent, that vulnerability is a trap. But when they enter a relationship where boundaries are honored, where they are asked before they are touched, where their no is always respected, healing becomes a lived experience. That kind of love rewires the nervous system. It teaches the body that it's safe now, that the past is over, that closeness can be nurturing instead of threatening. And for some women, healing begins not in romance, but in friendship. A platonic connection built on honesty, laughter, and mutual support can be just as healing as romantic love. A friend who listens without judgment, a sister who holds space for grief, a chosen family that reminds her she is not defined by her history. These relationships serve as reminders that love comes in many forms, and that healing is not dependent on one particular kind of bond. What matters is the depth of the connection, not the label we give it. And healing through connection also challenges the toxic idea that we must fix ourselves before we are worthy of love. Many women delay intimacy because they feel not ready, not whole, enough. They see their brokenness as a barrier. But real connection doesn't demand perfection. It welcomes imperfection with open arms. When a woman allows herself to be loved while still in progress, still uncertain, still wounded, she discovers a truth. Healing and loving can coexist. In fact, they often accelerate each other. Love doesn't wait for us to be perfect. It meets us in the mess and helps us grow. And there's also something healing about being believed. Many limited women have been gaslit by society, told their pain isn't real, their struggles are exaggerated, their emotions are too much. When someone finally says, "I believe you," the validation alone can undo years of self-doubt. That belief, offered consistently and gently, becomes a foundation. And from that foundation, confidence grows. A woman who once questioned her own reality begins to reclaim her voice, her choices, her story. And for women who have been marginalized or overlooked because of race, disability, size, class, or identity, healing through connection often means finding someone who not only accepts them, but celebrates them. It means being with someone who doesn't try to erase their difference, but embraces it as part of their beauty. When a black woman is loved in a world that tries to criminalize her emotions, when a trans woman is held with respect in a world that tries to erase her identity, when a woman in a larger body is kissed without apology in a world that demands she shrink herself. These moments are not just romantic, they are revolutionary, they are healing, and connection also heals because it reminds us that we are not alone in our suffering. Pain is isolating. It convinces us that we are the only ones feeling this deeply, struggling this much. But when we connect, really connect with another human being, we discover that our pain is shared, that others have been where we are, and that we are part of something larger. This shared experience of humanity creates empathy, and empathy softens the hardest edges. It makes space for forgiveness of ourselves and others. And there's also healing in being needed. For women who have spent their lives being caretakers, sometimes the deepest healing comes when someone finally wants to take care of them, not out of pity, but out of love. When someone makes them tea when they're tired, remembers their favorite song, holds them when they cry. These gestures tell a new story. You are not just here to give, you are here to receive. And connection is also healing because it invites reflection. Being close to someone means we are constantly being mirrored. Sometimes we see our strength more clearly through someone else's eyes. Sometimes we realize we've outgrown certain beliefs or behaviors. Love, at its best, invites growth. And growth is a kind of healing. It is not always comfortable, but it is transformative. And there's also power in spiritual connection. For some women, healing begins in connection, not just to another person, but to something larger, God, the universe, purpose. A partner who respects her beliefs, who prays with her, or holds space for her rituals, contributes to her spiritual wholeness. In those moments, love becomes more than emotional support. It becomes sacred. It reminds her that she is held not just by one person, but by something eternal. And healing through connection is not linear. It's not immediate. It doesn't mean that the past vanishes or that wounds no longer ache, but it means that healing is no longer a solitary struggle. It becomes a shared journey, a dialogue, a process rooted in trust, in kindness, in mutual care. That shared experience turns pain into wisdom, fear into openness, survival into thriving. And ultimately, the most healing connections are the ones where a woman, N, is allowed to be her full self, where she doesn't have to censor her sadness, perform joy, or shrink her dreams, where she can be messy and magnificent at the same time. These relationships don't just support her, they reflect her back to herself in a way that says, you are already whole, you were always worthy, and that reflection is healing. That belief is healing. That connection, rooted in love, grown in truth, nourished by presence, is what helps these limited women become limitless.